Since childhood, her mother had one dream: to see her daughter married into a well-off, respectable family. When Neelam turned 17, that dream took a more determined shape. Instead of considering proposals from within their neighborhood or through the traditional matchmakers nearby, her mother did something unexpected. She took Neelam by the hand and traveled across the city to a luxurious, high-profile marriage bureau. Inside that gleaming office, filled with air-conditioned silence and glossy photographs, her mother handed over Neelam's picture and paid a hefty advance to initiate the process. Neelam, still caught in the awe of chandeliers and expensive furniture, didn't notice the financial transaction. It was only after they reached home that she realized something unusual had happened. "Why did you take me all the way across town for this?" she asked, confused. "We have matchmakers in our own area, and they've arranged plenty of decent matches." Her mother looked at her like she had said something foolish. "That bureau deals with the elite, people with money and class. You want to stay stuck in this broken neighborhood all your life?" She placed a hand on Neelam's head and added, "They took 50,000 rupees as an advance. You just wait and see the kind of proposal they'll bring." Neelam was stunned. 50,000? She whispered, wide-eyed. "Where did you get that kind of money?" The question was valid. Their father pushed a vegetable cart for a living. Every rupee he earned in a day was used by nightfall. They barely scraped by, and here her mother had handed over such a large amount for a promise. With a chuckle, her mother responded, "It's called investment. I've been saving for your wedding for years. Managed to gather 2 lakhs. Half will go toward finding the right match. The rest will cover your wedding. People from wealthy families don't demand dowry or expect us to pay for extravagant ceremonies. They handle all of that themselves." There was a glint of hope in her mother's voice. "Once a proposal comes from a high-status family, it's not just your life that changes, ours too. You're beautiful, Neelam. The moment they see you, they'll say yes." Neelam didn't know whether to be hopeful or scared. Everything her mother said sounded naive. Why would a rich, educated man come searching for a bride in their rundown street? Why would he accept a girl whose father sold vegetables in the market? But her mother lived in a world of imagined ease where everything seemed possible as long as you had determination and money. Neelam stayed quiet, unsure how to argue with someone who had already made up her mind. Her mother wasn't just investing money, she was investing dreams, and that's how the chain of events began. Just a week later, the marriage bureau called. They said a wealthy family was interested and planned to visit that evening. The reason for the urgency? The potential groom was leaving for abroad soon and wanted to marry before his departure. The moment her mother hung up the call, panic set in. She started pacing across the house, muttering about curtains, cushions, the state of the sofa, and the floors that now looked too dusty. Everything had to look perfect. Even if the house was small, it had to at least appear presentable. She rummaged through storage trunks, pulling out embroidered drapes and decorative covers as if preparing for a wedding, not just a visit. Then she turned to Neelam, holding up a pair of shiny clothes. "Get ready, go to the parlor, get a facial, do something about that dull face," she ordered. Neelam blinked. "A facial? Why would I go now? I'm already dressed fine," she replied, confused. "Don't argue. You think rich people don't notice these things? You're beautiful, yes, but right now you look plain. Go brighten yourself up." The tone left no room for protest. Neelam was pushed out of the door and sent to a nearby beauty salon with a few hundred rupees. Though she didn't care much for makeup or beauty treatments, she obeyed. Something about her mother's urgency made it feel like today was more than just a casual meeting. When she returned home, she was stunned. The entire room had transformed. Somehow, her mother had managed to borrow fancy chairs, hang new curtains, and even place a new tea table in the sitting area. Plates and cups were perfectly arranged, and there were expensive snacks stacked in a tray. She had even sent Neelam's father to pick up rolls and pastries from one of the city's best bakeries. It all looked surreal. As she stared around trying to make sense of this makeover, her mother barked again. "Stop staring. Go get dressed. They'll be here any minute." Trying to steady her nerves, Neelam quietly asked, "Shouldn't we at least call them back and ask how many people are coming? What if the room doesn't have enough space?" Her mother froze for a moment. "I forgot to ask that," she admitted. "Call the bureau. Find out now. We need to plan everything accordingly." Neelam called and spoke to the coordinator. The response left her more nervous than before. "The groom himself is coming," she whispered after ending the call, "with his sister and mother." She expected her mother to be furious. After all, she had always been strict about such things, about not allowing men to see women before the wedding, not encouraging casual meetings between prospective brides and grooms. But instead, her mother smiled. "This is even better," she said. "Once he sees you in person, he'll have no reason to refuse." Neelam stood frozen at her mother's words. The woman who had once condemned the idea of a bride and groom meeting before marriage was now completely transformed, welcoming it, even encouraging it. Just a few months ago, she had caused a commotion at a cousin's wedding because the bride and groom had been allowed to see each other during the Mendi function. That same woman was now excited that the boy would see her daughter directly, even before any formal agreement. Neelam felt her nerves tightening. "But you always said this wasn't right, that a girl shouldn't be displayed like this before marriage." Her mother looked at her with a strange expression, not harsh, but firm. "That was the old way. It still happens in poor families. But rich people do things differently, and I'm not marrying you into poverty, am I?" Neelam couldn't find the words to argue. Her mother had her mind fixed, and there was no point fighting it. Reluctantly, she returned to her room to get ready, her hands trembling as she adjusted her clothes. Her thoughts were spinning. Who was this man? Why did he want to rush into marriage? And what was the real reason for choosing a girl from such a modest background? Meanwhile, her father returned home carrying boxes of snacks and cold drinks. Her mother, without missing a beat, informed him that the groom and his family were arriving in an hour. The expression on his face shifted immediately. "They're bringing the boy? Why?" he asked sharply. "What's the need to bring him here and parade our daughter in front of a stranger?" But his concerns were brushed off just as easily. "Don't start again," she snapped. "You've done nothing but pull that vegetable cart your whole life. You couldn't give your daughter even a proper dowry. Let me handle this. If we land this proposal, our lives will change." He looked hurt, his shoulders dropped, and for a moment he seemed older than ever. Neelam saw the pain in his eyes and immediately went to him. She hugged him, whispering, "I'm happy with what we have. You've given me everything I needed. Please don't feel bad." He smiled faintly but said nothing. Retreating to his room, he closed the door behind him. Neelam's heart ached. Her father's silence was heavier than any argument. She knew he loved her deeply, even if he didn't always say it. And she also knew that today, in all this rush, he felt pushed aside. Irrelevant in a decision that should have been his, too. A few minutes later, a loud honk echoed outside. Her mother rushed in breathless, eyes gleaming. "They've arrived, but guys, and in a big car. The whole neighborhood is watching. Now go, be polite. Greet them properly." Neelam stood up slowly, heart racing. Something didn't feel right, but she couldn't put it into words. All she knew was that tonight, everything was about to change. From behind the slightly open door, Neelam peeked into the guest room. The visitors were already seated. The groom, his sister, and their mother wore expensive clothes and carried an unmistakable aura of wealth. But something about their expressions made Neelam uneasy. They didn't seem warm or curious. Rather, they looked distant, almost bored. Her mother, on the other hand, was trying her best to impress. She hovered around them with an overzealous smile, offering snacks, praising their outfits, and pouring tea with trembling hands. From the way she behaved, one could easily mistake her excitement for desperation. Neelam stayed hidden behind the curtain, her heart thudding inside her chest. But then her name was called, and there was no escape. She picked up the tray of tea and stepped into the room, forcing her gaze downward. She greeted them quietly, barely above a whisper. As she served the tea, she felt their eyes fixed on her. When she glanced up, she saw all three staring at her, especially the groom, who seemed almost transfixed. He didn't blink, didn't shift, just kept staring. Feeling uncomfortable, she quickly placed the last cup on the table and sat at the far end, her fingers nervously twined together in her lap. The room fell into a thick silence, broken only by the clink of cups and her mother's awkward laughter. Sensing the tension, her mother jumped in. "She's very shy. She rarely sits in front of strangers. That's why she's a bit quiet." The groom's mother smiled for the first time and leaned toward Neelam. We like her very much. She's beautiful, and beauty speaks louder than words. She reached into her purse and pulled out a 5,000 rupee note, placing it in Neelam's hand. She's not just your daughter anymore, she's ours now. Neelam's throat tightened. Her mother's eyes shone with pride. We don't need any further discussion. You're such decent people. You have our word. The proposal is accepted. It all felt too quick, too easy. Neelam wanted to object, to ask questions, but who was he really? What did he do abroad? Why hadn't anyone asked about his background? But the joy in her mother's face held her back, and in all of this her father remained absent, still locked away in his room, unaware that a decision was being made without him. The groom's family smiled graciously. Since he has to leave soon, we'll fix the wedding for 15 days from now. And don't worry about the expenses, we'll take care of everything. Just send your daughter with 2 simple outfits. Neelam's mother nearly wept with joy. She distributed sweets in the neighborhood that same evening, declaring that their daughter had found her match in a rich foreign-based groom. But in a quiet corner of the house, her father said nothing. He simply stared at the floor while the room around him buzzed with excitement he couldn't share. The days that followed were a blur of excitement, shopping, and rushed preparations. Neelam's mother, despite the limited budget, spent almost the entire remaining amount from her savings on a few expensive outfits. She believed that appearance was everything. And this marriage was their one-way ticket out of struggle. Meanwhile, the groom's family has stayed in touch, sending over the bridal outfit and booking the beauty salon for Neelam's wedding makeover. To her mother, it was all a dream coming true. She walked around the neighborhood with her head held high, proudly announcing that her daughter had received a proposal from a wealthy, foreign-based boy who was handling all the wedding expenses. People around them were impressed. Many came to their home to congratulate them, some out of genuine happiness, others out of curiosity. They all wanted to know how a poor fruit vendor's daughter had landed such a match. But amidst the celebration, Neelam's father stayed silent. He neither opposed nor celebrated. He watched from a distance, carrying out his chores with a heavy heart. Whenever someone brought up the wedding, he only nodded, eyes dim. Neelam herself remained torn. On the surface, she played along, attending appointments, trying on her bridal outfit and smiling when expected. But inside, a storm of unease churned. She didn't know her soon-to-be husband beyond that single encounter. They hadn't spoken. She didn't know his nature, his voice, his habits. Only that he was leaving soon and wanted a bride to follow him abroad. There was also a quiet guilt that lingered. Her father had always tried his best within his means. He never gave them luxuries, but he never let them go hungry either. And now it felt like he was being pushed aside, as if his contribution meant nothing. That realization made her restless. Finally, the wedding day arrived. Neelam sat in the parlor chair getting her makeup done by a professional artist. Layers of foundation, lipstick, jewelry, they transformed her appearance. She looked at her reflection and barely recognized herself. Everyone said she looked like a queen, but she didn't feel like one. She felt like a performer about to go on stage. At the wedding hall, guests started arriving. The groom's side had only a few people, while her mother had invited almost everyone from their street. Neelam entered the hall in her bridal dress, her eyes scanning the crowd nervously. Compliments echoed around her, people stared, and whispers followed her every step. She was placed on the stage, dazzling under bright lights. Her hands were trembling in her lap, her eyes searching for her father. But he was nowhere to be seen. He had quietly stayed back, too hurt to pretend joy. Everything had happened too fast. 15 days ago, she was a normal girl living a quiet life. And now she was moments away from becoming someone's wife, someone she barely knew. As Neelam sat on the stage, her heavily adorned hands resting in her lap, the noise of the hall faded into a distant hum. Her eyes searched the crowd for a familiar face, Basir's, perhaps her father's, but he hadn't come. Her mother, meanwhile, fluttered between guests like a butterfly, her pride on full display. She had invited the entire neighborhood and now basked in their envy. "My daughter is marrying into wealth," she had whispered to every guest who passed her by. The groom's side, in contrast, was minimal. Just a handful of relatives, all of them stiff and silent. It didn't bother her mother. Rich people are private. she explained earlier, brushing off the oddness with ease. They don't like big crowds. Neelam's thoughts were interrupted when the groom arrived with his small entourage. He wore a designer sherwani and walked with calculated calm. She looked at him again, this time as the man she was about to marry. Her heart beat harder, not from love or excitement, but from something unexplainable. Fear, doubt, maybe both. Soon after, the Qazi arrived for the nikah ceremony. Neelam was taken to the bridal room to await her turn. Her mother joined her, along with the groom's mother, who kept checking her phone and watch. Everything felt rushed, but Neelam was too overwhelmed to question it. Then, suddenly, the hall lights went out. Total darkness swallowed the space. Gasps echoed from the guests, and someone muttered about the generator. Neelam sat frozen in the pitch-black bridal room. She couldn't even see her own hands. Her mother and future mother-in-law quickly turned on their phone torches and told her to stay calm. "We'll go check what's happening," the groom's mother said, pulling her own mother along. Neelam was left alone in the darkness. She waited, trying to calm her thudding heart. Minutes passed. She couldn't see anything. Her phone was in her mother's purse, so she had no torch. She wrapped her arms around herself tightly, wishing someone would return soon. And then she heard the door creak shut. Her breath caught. "Mama," she whispered, her voice trembling. There was no answer. She stood up, her feet uncertain on the floor beneath her bridal dress. Before she could take another step, someone moved close. Too close. She felt a hand clamp tightly over her mouth before she could scream. Her body was yanked back violently and her bangles clattered to the ground. She struggled, thrashed, kicked. But whoever it was strong. The scent of cologne mixed with sweat filled her nose. Her muffled cries were swallowed by the darkness. And then everything went still. The horror that unfolded in those minutes left her hollow. Her jewelry had been torn off, her dress disheveled, and something deeper, far more sacred, stolen. She was left crumpled on the floor, breathless, humiliated, destroyed, and in that suffocating silence, all she could do was cry, not loudly, but brokenly, like a child waking from a nightmare she never asked to dream. 10 minutes later, just as suddenly as they had disappeared, the lights blazed back on. The once dark bridal room was flooded with brightness, revealing the horrifying scene left behind. Neelam lay motionless on the floor, her bridal dress torn, her jewelry scattered around her like broken promises. Her eyes were wide open, staring into nothing. At that moment, her mother burst through the door, followed by the groom's mother. The scream that tore from her mother's throat was so loud it silenced every voice in the hall. Guests turned their heads in shock, some rushing toward the room, others frozen in place. Her mother dropped to the floor beside her, shaking her, crying uncontrollably, trying to cover her with her dupatta. "What happened? Who did this?" she cried, her hands trembling as they cradled Neelam's face. But Neelam couldn't even form words. Her voice had abandoned her, just like her sense of safety. The groom's mother, at first shocked, quickly regained her composure, or rather, shifted her stance. What is this?" she asked, not with sympathy, but suspicion. "Why is she like this?" Neelam barely managed to whisper the truth. "Someone came in. When it was dark, I couldn't see him." Panic erupted. The Qazi, who had just arrived, stood still, stunned. The groom walked into the room and saw Neelam's condition, her torn dress, her broken state. And instead of kneeling beside her or asking what had happened, he stepped back as though she were something dirty. "She's been with someone else," his mother snapped. "If your daughter had someone else in mind, why bring us into this? What kind of drama is this?" The room began to spin. Neelam's mother cried, "What are you saying? She doesn't know who it was. She was attacked in the dark. You think this was her fault?" But the groom's mother wasn't listening. "We're leaving," she said, standing up and motioning to her son, "Kamayeng, come on, you're not marrying a girl like this. This whole thing was a mistake." The groom didn't argue. He didn't look back. He simply followed his mother out the door, leaving behind shattered dreams and a daughter who had been promised everything, only to be left with nothing. As news spread across the hall, whispers turned into full-blown murmurs. Something happened to the bride. The groom is leaving. Did you hear what they said? By the time the groom's family had driven away, Neelam's name was already being passed from mouth to mouth. Not with sympathy, but with gossip. Her tears, her pain, they had become a spectacle. She sat in the same place, barely breathing, while neighbors peeked into the room as if they were watching a tragic show unfold. Her father finally arrived, pale and shaken. He had heard the commotion, one look at his daughter, and he broke down, but there was nothing left to fix. The damage had been done, and it had been done in silence, in the dark, while everyone else looked the other way. They returned home in silence that night. No music, no farewell. No one walked behind Neelam as a bride. Only shame followed her now, like a shadow she couldn't escape. Back in the small house, the lights were on, but the hearts were dim. Neelam locked herself in her room, tears falling non-stop. Her red bridal dress now symbolized something else. Not celebration, but violation. Her mother sat outside the door, weeping, calling her name again and again, but Neelam didn't respond. Her father stood in a corner, his face buried in his hands, as if the weight of the world had finally crushed him. For days, no one in the family spoke properly. Neighbors whispered about what happened. Some expressed pity. Most passed judgment. The girl who was supposed to rise above her background had fallen into disgrace. Invitations turned to avoidance. Curiosity turned to cruelty. But Neelam wasn't broken. Not yet. One morning, with swollen eyes and trembling hands, she walked up to her father and said, "I want to report him." Her voice was shaky, but her eyes held strength. Her father flinched. "Beta, what good will it do? The police will humiliate us. They'll question you again and again. You've already suffered enough." Neelam took a deep breath. "I've lost everything. My reputation is gone. The only thing I can fight for now is justice. If I stay silent, he wins. If I speak up, maybe I can stop him from doing this to someone else." Her father looked at her for a long time, tears glistening in his eyes. Then silently, he nodded. Together, they went to the police station. At first, the officers were reluctant. Another wedding scandal. Another fallen bride. But when they retrieved the CCTV footage from the wedding hall, pieces began to fall into place. The generator had failed for over 30 minutes. Suspiciously long for such a facility. The staff confessed someone had paid them to cut the lights. A surprise for the bride, they were told. The surprise was a trap. As the investigation deepened, the truth began to surface. And what it revealed would change everything Neelam believed about that day, about the man she almost married, and the people who had watched her fall. The investigation progressed quickly after the wedding hall manager confessed. He revealed that the groom, Kamran, had paid him directly, asking for all lights to be shut off for at least 30 minutes during the wedding ceremony. Kamran claimed it was to give his bride a special surprise. At the time, it seemed odd, but the money was generous, and the hall had been fully paid for, so the staff didn't ask questions. But when the police checked the available CCTV footage, it became clear. Before the lights went out, Kamran had slipped away from his family and was seen approaching the bridal room. After that, the cameras went dark, intentionally. The footage didn't capture the crime, but the timeline, the statements, and the hall owner's testimony made the truth undeniable. Neelam had not been attacked by a stranger. She had been destroyed by the man who had vowed to marry her. Kamran had already fled to the United States by the time police arrived at his home, but his mother and sister were still in the city. When questioned, they initially lied, saying they knew nothing, but under pressure, they broke. Kamran had already confessed to them 2 days after the incident. He admitted that he never wanted to marry a poor girl. He had a wife back in the U.S. and had been pressured by his family into seeing local matches. When he met Neelam, he developed a dark obsession. He said yes to the marriage only to get close to her, and then, on the wedding night, acted out his sick desire. His mother and sister had known, and they had stayed silent. The police arrested them for withholding information and aiding Kamran's escape. A formal case was filed. Neelam's statement became the backbone of the prosecution. Media outlets picked up the story. What was once a whispered scandal became national news. A girl silenced in darkness now had the country listening. 6 months passed. Neelam still lived in the same house, but everything had changed. Her mother barely spoke, guilt eating away at her from the inside. She no longer boasted about rich grooms or dreamed of lavish weddings. Her father, though broken, stood beside Neelam now, her quiet support in a world too loud with judgment. Neelam had not recovered fully. Maybe she never would. But she had transformed. She no longer lowered her eyes. She no longer feared the gaze of strangers. She walked with a quiet dignity, and she waited, not for another proposal, but for justice. In her final words to a reporter who came to interview her story, she asked, "Why do we dress up girls like dolls and throw them in front of strangers? Why do we force them to smile when they're terrified inside? And why, when something goes wrong, do we still ask, what did she do wrong?" Then she looked directly into the camera. "I did nothing wrong." And finally, someone believed her.